Welcome to part 2. In this module, we're going to be talking about your very first interaction you have with a prospective customer. I call this the cold call. Now, this module is going to be in 3 different sections. The first section is going to be talking about how you need to unlearn everything that you know about cold calling. The second section, we're going to cover specific objectives and what you're trying to accomplish with your prospective customer in this interaction. In the third section, we're going to get specific about what exactly transpires in this interaction. So before we get started and even get into any information about what this interaction is all about, I want to start with a simple definition of how I want you to unlearn what you know about cold calling. A cold call is any interaction that is unplanned or unscheduled. So the reason that this new definition of any interaction that is unplanned or unscheduled is really a cold call is so important is we all have a stereotype of what cold calling is. If you've ever seen the movie Boiler Room, you might imagine that cold calling is when you're in this big, large call center and you have a list of names and numbers and you're just picking up the phone and calling people and trying to get business. But in reality, anytime you have an unplanned phone call or meeting, it's a cold call, it's a cold interaction, and you need to be doing the same thing whether you are proactively calling somebody or whether they were calling you. And this counts for referrals, this counts for email inquiries to your website that you're following up with people, it counts for emails and phone calls. Any type of communication that is unplanned and unscheduled is a cold call. Now, cold calls in general are potentially bad, and I don't mean that like you shouldn't be participating in cold calls, but it's not a good time to present any kind of value or to give anybody any insight into your business. It's an inefficient use of time. If you're working on a project and all of a sudden your phone rings and it's a prospective client and you drop everything that you're currently working on and you spend an hour or 2 hours with that person on the phone because you're so hungry for business, that's an extremely inefficient use of your time. Because then when you go back to work on your project, you're going to have wasted 2 hours. It's going to take you a while to get back into that moment and figure out where you left off on your work. So the cold call in general, both for the receiving party and the calling party, is usually a large waste of time. It stops what you're currently working on and it makes you shift gears and focus on the cold call. So typically, in order to make cold calls really effective, you need to make sure that they are the smallest amount of time possible. You also want to be very careful about providing any value to somebody in your cold call. Cold calls are a required part of the sales process. Every single sale is going to start with an unscheduled and unplanned interaction. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to provide all of your value in the cold call. And when it comes to cold calls with people that you have no relationship with, you want to make sure you move as quickly as possible into your scheduled interaction process, because when you have no relationship with somebody, it's going to be very difficult to sell them. It's going to be very difficult to build any value for what you do. So when somebody calls you out of the blue that you've never spoken to before, that's a cold call, and you need to make sure that you address that interaction exactly like you're supposed to with the cold call. Now that you know that a cold call is any unplanned or unscheduled interaction that you have with a prospective customer, it's time to focus in on what our objective is for the cold call.